Delighted to be here. I don't know whether I'm totally prepared, but I've been trained throughout life to be also ready. And sitting here next to a pastor, I'm pretty sure he'll reinforce that. Civil rights, as it appears. I am perhaps not the best person to talk about civil rights here in the United States, basically because I spent the majority of the civil rights era in the military, and the 23 years I served in the military, 15 of them were spent overseas. But I did experience it, not that much here in Henry County, but I experienced it throughout the United States, also in Europe and in Southeast Asia. I'm not going to do that much talking. I'm going to allow our distinguished guests here, panelists, to do the majority of the talking. But we will pause and take questions and try to answer your questions, and hopefully we'll leave here today a little bit more informed on the civil rights era here in Martinsville, Henry County, and also the United States. The first person we're going to have talk with you is Bishop Richardson, and he will start our dialogue, and he will, anytime you have a question, just raise your hand and we will entertain questions. Okay?
Well, thank you for your presence today, because this says that this topic has some importance to you, the fact that you would take the time to attend, and I'm grateful and honored to have the opportunity to be one of the panelists. Being a pastor, let me start with the role of the church in the civil rights movement, because many of the leaders of the civil rights movement were ministers. Many of you know Dr. King, but there were so many others. Let me come locally. As a teenager, we didn't have a college in Martinsville at the beginning of of the civil rights movement. Patrick Henry Community College came a little later. But in 1959, 1960, we actually had high school students walking the picket lines with pastors. Some of the pastors were my late father, Bishop J.C. Richardson Sr., Dr. Hezekiah Morris, who pastored the High Street Baptist Church, Reverend Robert Foster, who pastored Grace Presbyterian Church, Reverend Dr. Ezel Hampton, who pastored New Light Baptist Church in Ridgeway, and Shiloh Baptist Church in Fieldale. The late Bishop H.C. Eggleston, who pastored Shiloh where the Cross, and my late father-in-law, Bishop Ariel Harrison. And pastors were out front because they didn't have to worry about losing their jobs if they walked the picket line. So that's one of the reasons that pastors took the lead. There were others in the community who were very helpful in providing resources and providing information and providing support, money, or whatever. But teenagers such as myself walked the picket line. One of our leaders was the late Sammy Red Sr. His son is on the New College Institute staff. But Sammy Red Sr., in my opinion, was a very extraordinary individual. As a teenager, he had a lot of leadership skills. He later became the first black elected official from Henry County elected to the Board of Supervisors. And he was also a very successful businessman. But in terms of the role of the church has always been involved in civil rights, even before what we call 1960. If you look at the beginning of many of our schools of higher education, many of our secondary schools, they started in churches. Where I finished, well, both of the colleges that I graduated from were started by churches, my undergrad as well as my seminary. So the churches in the black community have always played a major role in civil rights, and as I said, pastors were. Now, when I talk about church, I like to look at it in several different ways. When I think about African American religious experience, I look at blacks who are part of predominantly white denominations, such as Roman Catholics, because some of those participated in the civil rights movement. Episcopals, United Methodists, Presbyterians, even though they have blacks in them, those are predominantly white denominations. Then you look at your non-traditional groups like Mormons, Jehovah's Witnesses, Nation of Islam. Jehovah's Witnesses are non-political. They don't get involved. In fact, if you read about Nelson Mandela, the reason he and his first wife, before he married Winnie, she was his second wife, one of the reasons they split up is because his first wife was a Jehovah's Witness, and they did not believe in getting involved in political action or civil rights. And that disturbed me, because if you're saying, and of course, you know, Jehovah's Witnesses may take issue with me on this, but if your religion say that you've been oppressed because of the color of your skin and your religion prevents you from getting involved, then that troubles me, because in terms of African Americans, that certainly did not help them, in my opinion. So you have non-traditional groups, you have non-Christian groups like Muslims. Muhammad Ali is a Muslim. He started out being a part of the Nation of Islam, but he later converted to Orthodox Islam. There is a difference. Minister Louis Farrakhan heads the Nation of Islam. They are not Orthodox Islam. Jews, some of us are old enough to remember Sammy Davis Jr., even though Christians considered ourselves Judeo-Christians, Judaism is really a separate religion from Christianity. But Sammy Davis Jr., who in my opinion, one of the greatest entertainers in the world, was a practicing Jew. And Buddhists, Tina Turner is a practicing Buddhist. And I mentioned those names because even though you may not be that familiar with the religion, these individuals you will know about. But people from different religions also assisted in the civil rights movement. And then you have what I call traditional black denominations. Baptists, you have primitive Baptists, you have progressive primitive Baptists, you have free will Baptists, you have missionary Baptists, you have full gospel Baptists. And then on the Methodists in the black church, you have three predominant groups: African Methodist Episcopal, African Methodist Episcopal Zion, Christian Methodist Episcopal. I call them the alphabet churches. And then my group, which is Pentecostal, we are separated by Trinitarian Pentecostal and Oneness or Apostolic Pentecostals. And I mention that because you have this broad spectrum of religion in the black community. And religion has been a major force in the civil rights movement. One of my concerns today, however, is I am prayerful that more churches will expand our definition of ministry. For example, at Patrick Henry Community College, I wonder how many professional blacks are on staff here. I don't know what the answer is. One of the things that I've pushed for since I've been on the school board is to have more minorities in the school system. Because when I look at Carlisle, when I look at the governor's school, they are predominantly white. That's no problem for anybody, that the student body and the faculty and administration are predominantly white. But then when it comes to the public schools, which are predominantly minority, then people say it makes no difference of the color of the teachers. Documentation has shown that children do better academically when they have individuals who look like them. And plus, our kids need to see that, yes, we are good custodians, we're good in the cafeteria, and there's nothing wrong with those jobs, but we can do that and be principals and teachers as well. And so the civil rights movement needs to continue, and we need people in church to define ministry beyond what happens on Sunday morning and Wednesday night. And I don't want to get into conservative Christians because I wouldn't pass the mic, but if you have any questions on that, I'll certainly be glad to respond to, give you my opinion on conservative Christians.
I have a comment and a discussion, well, a question. As far as my comment, it's about something that was said, but it's not to contradict you, because you know you're one of my community heroes, Pastor Richardson. So I'm going to tell everybody that.
No, just like I expressed my opinion, please feel free to express your opinion.
Well, I still want to say that, because you are one of my heroes.
Thank you.
Yes, sir. Groups that do not get involved in politics or demonstrations or whatever, I think that maybe if they live what they preach, that in itself, I think, will helps those that do make that stand. Their prayers and their life, and that's my comment. But my question is, that African Americans have been so blessed. We have just been tremendously blessed. And so, do you think that reverse discrimination may become a concern? Because I know 2050, it has been said that Caucasians will be in the minority, and maybe before 2050. And one of my concerns is that we may do what was done to us.
Well, I appreciate your concern for that. I don't have that concern, and the reason I don't have that concern is you have to look at things historically and then look at the contemporary situation. If a person does not get involved, then that person, I don't care how much, the Bible said faith without works is dead. So you can pray till you get purple in the face, but if you don't confront City Hall about getting more minorities in City Hall, it's not going to change. So I believe in prayer. In fact, I spent the last 4 months at the church teaching on prayer. That's how important prayer is to me. But prayer has to be accompanied by action. And if you look at the example of Jesus Christ, he not only prayed, but he acted. And in terms of reverse discrimination, I think you are being farsighted, and that's fine. But let me give an example. In July, the U.S. Congress is going to have a national prayer, and they're going to recognize and honor and revere George Washington. I would not set foot at that prayer because George Washington had my ancestors enslaved. How do you think Jews would feel if they were invited to a prayer meeting that recognized Adolf Hitler? Even though he was a hellion, he did some positive things. So blacks are continued asked, we are asked to forgive. When are they going to forgive? So I think it has to be reconciliation. So they have to make some changes, and yes, we can address those changes. I'm not worried about reverse discrimination simply because we're not in power, we're not in control. I don't have the authority to really block a person from getting a job because of their color, and I wouldn't if I could, because I believe in following the example of Jesus Christ. And so I think you need to deal with what is before you get too excited about what is to come. And the isness is we need to address discrimination. There's a difference between racism and prejudice. And I don't want to dominate the panel. I want somebody else to talk, but after they've talked, then I'll certainly be glad to respond.
Thank you, Brother Richardson. I can always count on your eloquent oratory.
Sounds like a Pentecostal speaking in tongues, sister.
Name is Chad Martin. I want to thank my Aunt Aileen for allowing me to be a part of this conversation. I think one of the things about civil rights for me is the same name of this very institution. Patrick Henry was known for his famous quote, "Give me liberty or give me death." And I think that's one of the things that African Americans have cried for in this country. Give me liberty or give me death. I think if we look at some of our highest documents in this country, and I'll talk from a government perspective, our highest documents have said a government for the people, by the people. Things like the preamble that have said to establish justice and to ensure domestic tranquility. And I think one of the issues that's happened is if we look at W.B. Du Bois' book when he published in 1901, Souls of Black Folk, he said the problem of the 20th century is a problem of the color line. If we fast forward a little bit, we look at after Dr. King was killed, we look at 68 when the Kerner Commission came out and said we're having two countries, one white, one black, one fair, separate and unequal. And I think one of the issues that we're still dealing with today, if we looked at when 63, the March in 63, one of the three things they marched for was pretty much civil rights, jobs, and justice. We just went last year for the same march, the anniversary. Guess what we marched against? The same issues, civil rights, jobs, and justice. And the scary part about that is that those numbers for the unemployment rate, especially for African American males, were the exact same in 63. And so have we really progressed as much? I've seen some positive things, I really have. And there's some things in the Civil Rights Bill that was implemented to make sure, it was very interesting. I was doing research as my aunt asked me to come and speak. I did some research, and if you looked at Dr. King's letter from Birmingham jail, he started talking about it's crazy how when you travel, you have to make your travel plans because certain hotels you couldn't stay in. And so I researched that, and it was actually a book for African American travel in the United States. It was called Green's Book of Travel, and it pinpointed certain hotels that you could and could not stay in. So when you travel, it just showed you places that you could eat, rest stops, rest places not to go to. And so that is very, I mean, just think about it. You are a citizen, a tax-paying citizen, and can't even go in certain places in your own country. Even today, there are certain places in Martinsville and Henry County that will not allow African Americans to go. There is a private club in Henry County that will not allow membership for somebody to go to. I didn't even know about it. I fell upon the conversation by two friends. They said, "Chad, am I racist for going to this club?" And I was like, "I don't even know what club you're talking about." And I said, "Well, you're not racist for going, but you are supporting a racist establishment by going to that." And so and the Reverend talked about it. Certain aspects, because certain African Americans had jobs and so they were scared to lose their jobs. One of the things, since we are on a college campus, one of the things I want to stress to the youth, if it wasn't for the youth, some of those marches, some of those protests would not have made it, because some of those, when teachers would turn their backs, those students jumped out of the classrooms and started the marches. And I went to Shaw University, and Shaw University is where SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, was founded on, right there where Dr. King wrote it. Right there when Greensboro sit-ins. It started with four college students in a room sitting together and said, "Hey, let's go to the Woolworth, and we're not going to take this anymore." And so that's one of the things I do want to stress. Another thing that is very interesting, the Civil Rights Bill that came through, that wasn't the first time that Civil Rights Bill had came through. It had happened probably about 3 or 4 times before that, but it was so watered down that it really didn't hold any kind of weight. And so some of the things, if you look at that Civil Rights Bill, it it ended desegregation. And when Thurgood Marshall, who actually came to Martinsville, Thurgood Marshall, who pushed that case, it was 5 cases. It wasn't just Brown Board of Education. It was 5 other cases that he tied along with that. And one of those cases was in Virginia that he tied along with that case to desegregate the schools. Some other issues with the Civil Rights Bill was public accommodations, like going to hotels, going to certain restaurants. Making sure employment, especially when it becomes a situation to where it's federal employment, where tax-paying citizens' money are going to pay for that institution, and making sure everybody has the right to be able to be employed by their job. I recently, I really don't even like talking about this, especially when it happened to me. I recently dealt with a teacher who actually came out of their mouth and said 3 seniors were probably just mad because they were fat and black. And when the director laughed, it kind of got me, because that person should have been fired on the spot. I've pretty much kept quiet about that, and it actually, I don't even like saying it since we are on this campus, but it actually happened on this campus, and this was last year. But, and so those are some of the issues that we're still addressing with the Civil Rights Bill. And so, and I'll stop and kind of piggyback with Ms. Lee to kind of touch on your question. When it becomes a situation of reverse discrimination, you know, when I was in high school, that's what I actually used to think affirmative action was, until I got enlightened. And I don't mean enlightened as I was ignorant at the time, but I was ignorant to life at the time. And so there's certain organizations, even in Martinsville, if you look throughout that organization, they are made of all of one culture and all of one sex. And when you've applied to a certain job and you're overly qualified for that job, and the person that gets that job fits a certain criteria, not because of the job requirement, but because everybody else in that office looks like that person, That's when you have a situation why affirmative action is so necessary. Is because if it wasn't for affirmative action, you wouldn't get the opportunity to get looked at for that job. And so one of the things with affirmative action, it wasn't that you had to have a quota for the job, they just had to prove that you got a chance to be interviewed and looked at. And I'll go ahead and pass the mic.
Let me say thank you for allowing me to sit on this panel. I don't believe that I am the most qualified, especially talking about the history of civil rights in America. But one of the things that I want to talk about real briefly, and I would like to also entertain questions if we have an opportunity. And what I want to reflect on is Michelle Alexander's book entitled The New Jim Crow, Mass Incarceration in the Age of Colorblindness. Michelle Alexander, she does a wonderful, wonderful job, and she argues that many of the gains of the civil rights movement have been undermined by mass incarceration of Black Americans, starting with the war on drugs under President Reagan's administration. I don't know if y'all remember that. But while she also suggests that while Jim Crow laws have been moved off of the books, there are literally millions of Black Americans or Blacks. They're arrested for minor crimes, and they remain marginalized and disenfranchised, and they're trapped by a criminal justice system that brands them as felons and also denies them the basic rights and opportunities that will allow them to become productive and law-abiding citizens. In other words, in a nutshell, she suggests that if okay, we've removed Jim Crow off of the books, that's fine, because what I can do, I can place trappings for these same persons, and if I can accentuate and if I can magnify the crimes that you have committed, if I can centralize the crimes that we know that Blacks are going to commit, and if I lay down or mandate a tougher sentence for them, then that they would become, of course, felons, then now I will deny them those civil rights. You can't vote, you can't, there are a whole lot of other things. You can't get a good job. And so what she's suggesting is the new Jim Crow is the mass incarceration in this age of colorblindness. And one of the other things that she talks about is that there are more African Americans either in jail, prison, or they're felons than there were slaves in maybe 1897. I'm not certain of the date, but what she was saying is that there are more African Americans, either felons or in jails and prisons, than there were slaves in the United States during that particular time that she was referring to. And she's identified that as a civil rights issue. And so my question is today, while we raise issues, how do we deal with it? How do we develop a framework and a system that moves us away from the caste system? When I say caste, C-A-S-T-E, the caste system, excuse me, C-A-S-T-E, the caste system where the social structure that divides people on the basis of their inherited social status. And so to me, that's just another form of classism, if you will. And so how do we move from that? How do we, and it's just a question, how do we take a look at race relations, civil rights in America as it relates to what Michelle Alexander refers to as the new Jim Crow. How do we move away from that? You know, how do we take these issues that Bishop Richardson and Brother Chad have raised today, as well as Brother Milner? How do we take these and literally do something about it?
Something that I'd like to add. The U.S. Armed Forces was in the forefront of the civil rights struggle. The U.S. Armed Forces was the first institution in the United States to integrate back in 48-50. And I was fortunate to be able to see the results of that and to witness the results of it. I'll give you a real quick incident I was involved in Texas in 1963. I was with a group of 26 military servicemen in uniform. I was the only black. We stopped in a Howard Johnson in Greenville, Texas to eat. The waitress get halfway down where I'm sitting and she'd tell me that, I'm sorry, but I can't serve it. You'll have to leave. I pretend I didn't hear her. She said it a second time. I got up and I got on the bus. Well, to wrap all this up, within about 3 months, Fort Hood, Texas, at that time was the largest military base in the United States, received a general named Emerson. He was called a gunfighter for short. He observed conditions there at Fort Hood, Texas. He called all of the businessmen within a 100-mile radius of Fort Hood to come in and meet with him. He had a statement: you will either serve all of my troops or you will not serve any of them. And see, Fort Hood didn't have any other industries, the community around it. Fort Hood was their industry. A few days later, he called all the troops, 2 divisions, and support unit. He told us what he had told the businessmen. He said, now here is my personal telephone number. If you find any place within a 100-mile radius that won't serve you, let me know. The word went out that fast. And you know he did not receive a call? 5 of my friends and I, we got on my car, and we went around trying to find some places that wouldn't serve us. Well, what I'm saying is, one person took a stand. One person took a stand. And the military, the U.S. government backed that one person. The problem that I see with the civil rights struggle today is that we as African Americans have become complacent. We've become complacent. We no longer want to get involved. It's a sad state of affair when I go to events throughout the county and city and find out that I'm the only black elected official there. 1/3 of the Henry County population is black. Approximately half of the city. City have 1, the county have 1. Are we satisfied with the status quo? Are we afraid to get involved? Are all the people that care going on before us? It's very possible that what we had before can return if we continue with complacency. The thing is, get involved. Well, I'm not qualified. A lot of those in office are not qualified.
Amen.
So let's get involved. And let's try to, if you feel that you cannot hold this elected position or that elected position, find someone that you can throw your lot in with and support them. I'm going to pass it back to the bishop.
I agree with Mr. Milner in part, and I may try to respond to one of Reverend Whitfield's questions. I asked our congregation about 3 years ago, maybe a little longer, every adult at Mount Sinai, if you live in the city, go to the city council, make yourself available to be appointed to one board, committee, or commission. If you live in the county, go to the board of supervisors. All of our congregation has not responded. That's what I mean when I say I want to see churches begin to broaden that definition of ministry. As I understand it, ministry is not just dealing with the spiritual side of mankind. My desire is to see us look at what I call the holistic approach. We're concerned about the body, the mind, and the spirit. And so, in order for me to practice what I preached, I went to the city council and made myself available to be appointed to the planning commission, because I wasn't going to do anything. My father, who was my pastor, told, don't ever ask the people to do anything that you're not willing to do yourself. And I was trying to set an example. And at the time that I served on the planning commission, I was the only black on the planning commission. When I was asked, when I was appointed to the school board, then I resigned from that. But Brother Milner is right. But it's a two-sided coin. There are groups who will try to discourage minorities from getting involved. Now, the city council had an opportunity to appoint a minority school board. They didn't do it. Why? When they have the opportunity to do it, they still come up with a majority white board. So it's a two-sided coin. Those who are in positions of power have to be held accountable, but those in the minority community have to be willing to get involved. He's absolutely correct. Power cedes nothing without a fight. And I don't mean a physical fight, I mean at the ballot box. We are 50% of Martinsville. There should be minorities sprinkled throughout the government of Martinsville City. And it's not going to change if we don't say it's time for it to change. The city government is run by taxpayers. We are taxpayers. This is a public institution here, Patrick Henry Community College. It's supported by taxes, but it's also supported by... But there should be a hue and cry in 2014 that says we need more minorities at all of our public institutions. Private, that's another matter. But it has to come from whites who recognize that this is wrong, and also from minorities who recognize that it is wrong. Just because you pray with me and you are of a different ethnicity does not mean that we're brothers. You got to be willing to go to battle with me, okay? Because there are some blacks and white ministers who are meeting together, and I met with them, and I say to them what I'm saying to you: I will pray with you if you work with me. If you ain't going to do nothing after you get up off your knees, I'll pray by myself. Because I can get more, I feel like I have better progress because I don't have any distractions. I believe in the power of prayer. That's why I'm where I am today, because I know that prayer works. But you see, there's a difference between, I teach the difference between ritualistic prayer and lifestyle prayer. Ritualistic prayer is what we do when we open school board. Ritualistic prayer is what we do when we open city council. It doesn't necessarily impact the decisions that we make. Lifestyle prayer means that your behavior, your attitude, and your actions change because prayer has become a way of life. So we don't need to confuse ritualistic prayer with lifestyle prayer. It's a difference. And a lot of folk get caught up in ritualistic prayer, and we had a good interracial prayer meeting. Well, what has happened? What differences are you making in the community? If you're not making any difference, then what good is your prayer doing other than giving you a good feeling on the inside? Yeah, I prayed with some colors. I feel better now. Come on. It's time for us to move past that absurd foolishness, because a lot of people are convinced that that's progress. That's not progress. That's appeasement. And we need to call it what it is. But Brother Miller is right. Until the minorities stand up and get involved. And what I have found out from serving on these boards, ain't nobody on any board I've served on more intelligent than I am. No board I've served on has anybody on that board been more intelligent than I am. Now, when it comes to Christian ethics, I'm the expert on every board I serve on. Because there's no board I've served on anybody who studied religion for 40 years like I have. So you can't tell me about religion, and especially Christianity, because I've spent my life studying it. I know when we are pretending and what's real, you know. So when we start talking about conservative Christians and liberal Christians, my question is, what is a biblical Christian? So we define our agenda. All right, it's time for me to pass the mic. You got too many preachers over here.
Well, I did want to touch on one thing Reverend just said. It's very interesting when the civil rights movement began, when Emmett Till in '55 got killed, and that same year Rosa Parks sat on the front side of the bus. It's interesting that Dr. King and a few of those other pastors, along with SCLC, got on board, and then now we're coming to a situation to where certain pastors will not get in that fight. Not real, and the argument has been is that I don't want to marry church and politics, not realizing that policy dictates how high you can have a steeple on your church. Policy dictates if you're a 501c3 or not. And so one of the things, please don't use it as an excuse to hide behind, because people are suffering while one of my teachers at Divinity School, Dr. Gardner Taylor, who's known as the African American Dean of the pulpit, he says when the pulpit echoes the pews, the church has lost its power. And so what he's saying is when the pulpit is not out front leading, there's an issue. It was Dr. King, it was either Dr. King or Gandhi, when they were doing one of the protest marches. He sat back and he looked and he said, "There goes my people. They need a leader in front of them." And that's when he went out in front of them to lead. And so I think not only pastors, but just committed citizens. We can't put all the weight on pastors, but just committed citizens. And it's not just about going to city council meetings and school board meetings. It's about showing up, just showing up sometimes. You'd be very interested in just going to a meeting and hearing some of the things that actually goes on. Just to touch on what Pastor Whitfield said about the Michelle Alexander's book. In 1901, just to piggyback a little bit on, in 1901, Virginia delegate Carter Glass actually said this at a General Assembly. He said, "Let's create a felony system to keep the darky out of the political system." So if it is that important for you to keep somebody out, shouldn't it be that much more important for me to be inside that system? There were certain people who not only died, sweat, and bled just to register to vote, not just to vote, but just to register to get that right to vote. And so that's just to piggyback a little bit of how important it actually is for what he was talking about.
I have a question.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, I want to go back to what you mentioned about Emmett Till. I noticed here recently there seem to be a lot of Emmett Till type of situations that are springing up today. Just recently, the Dunn case, recently the Trayvon Martin case, and then another case where the child was found at the bleachers, and another case where the child was, the members were dismembered, but yet they were saying it had to do with drugs. How can we go about fighting the judicial system when we see in these type of crimes surfacing our today's society, to have these, maybe have these people retried or have these cases more thoroughly investigated and not just being satisfied with the judicial system saying, well, the police failed at getting this amount of evidence. Yeah, thank you. So what is it that we can do? Because this is a concern to me, and I must admit I do have this type of advocacy in my blood, and I really like to. I like to see justice done and things done fair and correctly, regardless of your race or nationality. But something like this, it's beginning to surface. It's so prominent, and what can we do to go to that judicial level? What do you think are some of the things we could do?
That's a beautiful question. I'm glad you asked it. Elie Wiesel, Holocaust survivor, he said in the book The Night, he said the real sin that happened in the Holocaust was the apathy and indifference that people had. And so I'm glad you talked about those cases, and I'll just touch on another case. The youngest kid that was actually, African-American child that was actually killed was a 14-year-old. He was actually electrocuted, and they said that he actually committed rape, which it came out that he actually did. And so to touch on how, as your question is, how can we change that judicial system? We had that very panel discussion here on PHCC's campus right after the Trayvon Martin case. And one of the things that we realized was, and a lot of these cases are going in Florida when it comes to the stand your ground laws and certain things like that. So 2 or 3 things came out of that discussion. One was that, number 2, how do you get on a jury? You have to register to vote, and that becomes how you get on the jury. And what happens is, because of the felony system that Reverend Whitfield talked about, a lot of people are not able to be on that jury. And so one of the things is you have to register to vote. That's a have to. That's just something that we have to start doing. The new Jim Crow, exactly. Another thing we have to start doing is actually paying attention to our judicial systems and our lawmakers, and not only voting, that's part of it, but actually holding them to the fire after we vote for them. Saying, I'm watching everything you're doing. I don't think we realize, it's funny that we're talking about civil rights, but we just had a part of civil rights struck down. A part of that civil rights bill was actually just struck down. And so we need to pay attention to what's going on. So it's not just important for you to vote, but it's also important for you to monitor and push whoever you voted for to, hey, this is what we want, this is why we had you in. If you're not going to do that, there's another process in November to make sure that we have somebody in place that you won't be there again. And so I think we have to pay attention to that.
To respond to your question, I think 2 things. One is, I don't think there's enough education about how to. We're here, even when Chad talks about the involvement of pastors, preachers, and other community leaders, I don't think, especially persons who come up, through my era, that there's not enough education that's tangible. And so leaders like myself who want to get involved, then the education has to come from somewhere else. There's a conference that's held every year. I believe this was the 10th year. It's called the Proctor Conference. It was held in Dallas, Texas last week. They deal with this type thing all week long. At some point, I think we have to engage persons continuously on how to respond to 21st century civil rights issues. How do you deal with it? How do you make it contemporary? How do you apply it now for persons in here who never had to deal with upfront, face-to-face racism, that type of thing?
Would you tell me who Proctor was?
Dr. Samuel DeWitt Proctor was, you nod your head like, okay, he was not only a preacher and a civil rights advocate, but at Virginia Union, he was president. And also, North Carolina A&T State University.
And was one of the first leaders of the Peace Corps. One of the first leaders of the Peace Corps started by President John F. Kennedy and pastored the Abyssinian Baptist Church in Harlem for 20 years. That church was formerly pastored by Reverend Dr. Adam Clayton Powell Jr., who was one of the first blacks in Congress to chair a committee in the U.S. House of Representatives.
But in order to, let me mention this and we'll come back to you, but in order to change things, you must become a part of the system that makes the laws.
Yes.
You must become a part of the system that makes the laws. I'll give you one quick example. I was a teacher in the Henry County school system and did not like the way things were going. So I worked with a group of 4 other individuals for 3 years to get enough signatures on a petition so that elected school boards could be put on the ballot. Took 3 years because the first 2 years we didn't get enough votes. But after 3 years we finally got it on the ballot and it won by 86%. So you must work to become a part of the system that makes the rules. You cannot depend on someone else to take care of you. And that's what we're doing now. We are complaining about those and the rules that are made, but yet we're not making them, putting forth enough effort to become part of that system. If you want to be a judge, you must be a lawyer pretty much first. And look at the lawyers we have here in Martin Henry County, especially African-American lawyers. To become a lawyer, you have to go to school. So you must do that self-sacrifice and become a part of that system. And then you can change the system. But standing on the outside throwing rocks only works in the Ukraine.
My question is, what happened to the faculty member that discriminated against you? Is that person still working here?
That's one of the reasons why I didn't want to bring that up, because I felt like that question was going. And I tend to handle, because I'm a follower of Christ, and I have these guys watching over me, saying, making sure I'm trying to do the right thing. One of the things, or one of the ways I handled it, instead of going public about it, I actually went to administration and actually talked about what happened. Because what happened when that situation happened, my brother taught me something when he started teaching. He said, "Chad, there's a fine art of covering your butt." Right. And so write down everything that happens to you. And so what happened was I immediately went and typed an email to myself and sent it to another outside employer so they could have record of it. And so what I did was, first I asked the director, you know what, let's make this a teaching moment. I'm always trying to take the high road. Let's make this a teaching moment. Let's have a dismantling racism workshop within the staff. Because guess what? We deal with teens in the Henry County school system and Martinsville school system. You pretty much just threw the numbers out there. A lot of those teens are not just of one culture. And so for this young lady to say that, if she said that around me, imagine what she's saying when I'm not there. And so one of the things that I wanted to happen was a dismantling racism workshop with the staff. A few months went by, that did not happen. And so I said, you know what? I'm going to have to now go above this person's head and go to administration. One of the good things that came out of the conversation, and I'll just go ahead and be forthcoming, I had that conversation with Dr. Godwin. One of the good things that she said, you know what, Chad, I love this idea, but I'm not just going to do a one-time training. She said, I'm going to do a series of trainings with staff development dealing with dismantling racism. But it can't just be a one-time thing. It has to be a thing to where you understand about socioeconomics, to where you understand about culture. Because racism is so much more than just, I don't like you because of your certain color. It's understanding that, hey, certain people have certain advantages over people. And so that's why you have certain advantages. When people start talking about playing the race card and certain advantages and whatnot, you have to realize when somebody comes from a two-parent home, when you're in a color-conscious society and certain advantages are given, it's not because you just had everything, all these gifts, and you were given certain privileges that other people wouldn't give. And so it was a beautiful conversation that me and Dr. Godwin had.
My other question was, to the ministers, how can we get Dr. Barbers in our local NAACP and start fighting for rights in Martinsville and Henry County?
Again, while a lot of people don't want to hear me say this, that era in this area is dormant. The Reverend Barbers and the William Avon Kings, these persons, I don't know, they're in the minority. And unless you can create a 21st century awareness to whereby you can show them that how important it is and how these things are affecting, our community, it's going to be very, very difficult unless you can show them how it's affecting them. Because I don't think that we as ministers, I don't think that we see that it's directly affecting us. But the reason why is because I believe it's a lot of it's where we're located, and then the classism, that we're so used to in this area.
Also within the black community, preachers have always been one of the leading groups in the black community. But you have two groups, well, broadly, there are really more than two groups. You have two groups. You have groups that are trained, but you have a lot of self-made ministers in the black community who came up through the ranks, had gifts, certain skills, did not get any training, but were able to build buildings and build congregations. But a lot of times, even though that has been positive in some sense, it has not always been positive in the sense that I have been very narrow in my definition of exactly what ministry includes. And it includes pretty much feeding my particular flock and nothing beyond that. That's what I mean by expanding our definition of ministry. And so that's why I said earlier, many of the civil rights leaders were pastors who understood that after you pray on Sunday, then you got to go to work on the picket line or whatever on Monday, okay? So they didn't see a disconnect. And so what Reverend Whitfield is saying is absolutely right, in my opinion, that we have got to present it to more pastors in a way that says, just like it was important in the civil rights era for pastors to be involved outside of your congregation, it is even more critical today when you talk about the new Jim Crow, when you talk about the number of young black females who are having babies. I mean, there are so many issues that we have got to address. Because you see, I look at colorism and I also look at racism, and that's another lecture, but we have to deal with that as well.
We're over time, and we're going to have to wrap up. And I wish that we had more time because this could go on and on. But I cannot stress enough, get involved. Get involved first by registering to vote. Get involved second by voting. Get involved by associating yourself with someone that have the same ideas and see the same issues that you do. If you can't do it, get behind someone that you think can and then work with them. And it's a never-ending issue. It's not something we can do today and work hard on this year, and then for the next 3 years forget about it. It's a continuing issue. If you want to change things, get in a position. Get on that board. Get in that government. And then you can affect changes better from within than you can from without. I wish we had time for more questions, more dialogue, but I think we're already over our time. I thank each of you that took time and come out, and I hope that there's something that you can take away from here. And if you take nothing else away, get involved.
I'm sure that you all have received a wealth of information that you are all able to reflect on during this era, and as far as how we have progressed with pertaining to civil rights. And at this time, I would like to thank our moderator, Mr. Curtis Milner, Bishop James C. Richardson, Chad Martin, and Reverend Charles Whitfield for being on our panel. We thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule to come and serve on our panel today. And this concludes our panel discussion. We thank you all for coming.